When a troubled, impressionable young man came to dive into Reddit, he was met with all sorts of different, virtually unmoderated radical communities to pique his interest. When politics and anti-work subreddits weren't enough, he gradually came to move on to ideas that would lead him to wanting to attack the very idea of life itself. Right now, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. This is because lately I've been trying to find someone who could remove my data from all of these different marketing databases that I've never consented to being on. It's very hard to find a solid, definitive list of all of these companies that take your data and spread it all over the internet. It doesn't help that there have been numerous data breaches from different companies over the years that have little by little only been adding to the problem. Requesting to be removed off of all of these could take you years to do manually. That's where Incogni comes in. You can just make an account on Incogni and they will send a data protection law compliance request to all of these different companies and demand that they remove all of your data from these different companies' databases. They will even handle any disputes that come back to them. The US in particular has a big data privacy problem, those people search sites. These websites create detailed personal profiles of you and publish them online for anyone to see. This can expose you and your loved ones to anything from scams to identity theft to even online harassment and stalking. These companies have even taken out massive loans under people's names without them even knowing, putting them deep into debt and ruining their credit. Cyber criminals from an underground platform called SSNDOB were even stealing social security numbers and other personal info from large data brokers like Dun & Bradstreet in order to steal their identities. It's really crazy what they can get their hands on. Incogni's easy. Just make an account, give them the right to work on your behalf, and let them get to work. Take back your personal data with Incogni. Just use my code DIRETRIP at incogni.com/DIRETRIP and get 60% off an annual plan. Incogni is available risk-free for 30 days, so there's no harm in trialing it out. And now, back to the video. Online radicalization is really nothing new, especially when it comes to places like Reddit. Reddit offers a really unique environment when people with out-of-the-ordinary interests can connect with people in a way that they never could in real life. Due to that, you end up with this sort of snowball effect, where these people play off of each other more and more, getting each other more and more extreme until one of them finally snaps. Guy Edward Bartkus was born in September of 1999 in Waterbury, Connecticut, to his dad, Richard, and his mom, Diane. Together with his sister, the family all moved out to California when Guy was about 1.5 years old. While they first settled in North Palm Springs, they eventually moved to Joshua Tree and then finally on to Yucca Valley. Guy's father, Richard, later described him as a good-hearted kid, eager to help anyone around him. He was also really good with computers and enjoyed spending his time tinkering with machinery in the garage. His father would also take him shooting, noting that he was a pretty good shot even while he was still a kid. He said, "If he told you he was going to hit the C on a Coke can, he'd hit the C on the Coke can. Whatever he put his mind to, he was pretty good." Guy eventually began to run into problems in a few different areas. For one, he was very impressionable. According to his father, anytime another kid presented him with a new viewpoint or a new goal, Guy would latch on and follow them without question. He mentioned one specific incident in which one of Guy's friends talked him into smashing some cars in a demolition yard, getting him into some trouble. Another thing that caused an even bigger problem was Guy's growing fascination with explosives. He had an interest in building homemade rockets in his backyard, for one. He also enjoyed making smoke bombs and playing with matches. When he was 9 years old, this love of fire and explosives led Guy to burn down his family home after he slipped up while playing with matches. One day, Guy's father noticed him throw something under the shed and run back inside their home. His father thought that he was racing him to the computer, but that wasn't the case. Guy hid inside the home until, in the backyard, a surge of flames began to engulf the shed. Richard said, "He pushed it under the shed, thinking that the sand would put it out, but it didn't. It caught the shed on fire. And when the shed caught fire, it spread to the house and burned the house down." With the house and all of their belongings completely gone, Guy was left feeling very guilty. For a period of time, he avoided talking to anyone else in the house. Eventually, his parents came to argue about how best to discipline him when he got into trouble like this. This all led to the marriage slowly falling apart. A few years later, in 2012, Richard and Diane decided to separate over these issues among many others. More about Guy's father came to light shortly after when Diane decided to file a restraining order against him, saying that she felt threatened and, in her words, scared of his irrational behavior. She cited one incident she said happened after the couple split up. She said that Richard showed up to her workplace, a smoke shop, one day and presented a rifle, saying, "If I catch you with another man within the next 3 months, I'll shoot him 10 times in the head or between the eyes." Diane also said that Richard would often yell at, insult, and demean Guy and even call him gay as a child as well. There is some evidence of this on Richard's own Instagram page, where he made posts ridiculing his son for burning down the family home more than a decade after the fact, insulting him all the way. He wrote, "Guy Bartkus decided he was smart enough to play with stick matches outside and burn down the whole house and everything in it, and now he thinks he is so smart and so perfect and never made any mistakes in his life." The couple came to get fully divorced in 2013. Afterward, Diane decided to move out to 29 Palms with the kids. The next year would be the last time that Richard would ever come to see Guy, when he and his mother came to drop off some medication for him after he had a heart attack. Living near a Marine Corps Air-Ground Combat Center, Guy would spend the rest of his life living with his mother on her small property. Even so, he left the house so infrequently that his own neighbors had never seen him. Most of the time, he was indoors looking at various different websites on his computer. While he didn't have any of the traditional social media you might expect, like Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, he was very active on Reddit. Reddit is an online forum that is very well known at this point for silencing opposing opinions, creating echo chambers, and breeding extremism. Back in the day, if someone had an outlandish viewpoint, they wouldn't be able to find anyone else who agreed with them, and eventually they would either keep it to themselves or forget about it entirely. Thanks to Reddit offering very niche and specific subreddits for anything you could imagine, people are given a space where they can connect with other people with the same outlandish beliefs, hype each other up, and only exacerbate the problem. Some of these types of subreddits are relatively harmless, such as one in when the posters insist that their imaginary friends are real. Many of them are much more harmful, though. Some of these subreddits are specifically for users of hard drugs. Some of them, like r/gangstalking, feature actual paranoid schizophrenics who discuss their delusions of being followed and monitored. Considering that Reddit moderators have quite the reputation for deleting any posts that go against their preferred opinions, many of them will rarely ever see an opposing viewpoint, only giving them further validation that they are correct and that everyone would likely agree with them. Given all that, Reddit was one of the worst places for Guy to end up, as he was known to be very impressionable, with his own father saying, "He wasn't dumb, but he wasn't a leader. He was a follower. If somebody came along and said this was a good idea, he'd probably go along with it." Guy had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and, by all accounts, was unhappy with his life. This led him to hate every aspect of life in general, even down to the very concept of it. While discussing these feelings on Reddit, he came into contact with a man named Daniel Jongyeon Park, who was about 7 years older than him. As far back as 2016, the two posted on similar subreddits and came to share many of the same ideas, with Daniel having been known to relentlessly push his beliefs on others. Ever since high school, Daniel had been having problems. Much like Guy, he hated the concept of life. He chose to direct this hatred towards parents, blaming them for bringing life into the world in the first place. He started to tell everyone that it was his destiny to influence other people to have less children. At first, he did this simply by preaching to them, writing in one post, "A better question is, what did you do to make other people not have children? Dunno what I can do about other people. I just try to mention it when people seem like they're willing to listen." However, it wasn't long before his rants shifted from preaching to hints at some sort of a greater purpose. He told people that, even though he didn't want to live, he was staying alive to, in his own words, sacrifice himself for the sake of preventing more suffering. He really clicked with Guy, who not only shared the same beliefs, but also posted statements that echoed the same sentiment. Eventually, the two even got close enough to meet up in person, hanging out together once near Guy's hometown in July of 2024. On his own time, Guy would rant online about how he was a NEET, meaning someone who is not in employment, education, or training. In other words, someone who doesn't really do anything. Guy was, deep down, very sensitive about this aspect of himself, but he chose to act strong online, putting up a front that it didn't actually bother him at all. On the NEET subreddit, he explained that he had worked a few jobs before, such as working as an attendant for special needs kids on a school bus, but that things had been fairly dry ever since. He wrote, "Not saying everyone else should feel the same way, to be clear. I just thought that it was interesting that so many people seem to be deeply bothered by the fact that they are NEET. I got my first job at 16, working at a small local electronics assembly company where we assembled cable harnesses, tinned and stripped cables, and soldered components onto PCBs. I felt mostly neutral about the job. I was laid off after 6 months when the company ended up moving to another town a few hours away. A few years later, I got a job as a special needs school bus attendant, which was not at all as bad as it sounds, but eventually waking up at 4 a.m. became too miserable for me and I quit." He continued on in the post, talking about how all of this made him feel, writing, I'm 25 now and have done a few gigs here and there, but for the most part have been a NEET for a while now and it just does not bother me. It especially doesn't bother me now seeing how insanely toxic society is. I don't owe society a damn thing and I certainly don't care what they think of me. I do find it creepy though that they are so desperate to judge others and impose their culture on them. Many of his posts on the NEET subreddit touched on his other beliefs, showing that he was gradually come to blame his hopelessness on his parents. It seems that he felt better about himself if there was someone else to blame, whether it be his parents or society in general. He wrote, "There's nothing to thank society for. It forced you here without your consent. This is like thanking a rapist for raping you softly or some shit. Fuck that." Guy was eager to blame anyone and anything else for how his life was turning out. In a similar post, he wrote, "I tend to try and place blame in a pragmatic way, so like I could blame nature and life itself for all of this, but that isn't too useful since life as a whole likely isn't going to be stopped anytime soon. But if you go down the chain of events, you get to the parents, and that's more manageable. They could have decided not to have kids if they were only more aware and educated about the reality of life. Anyways, basically any bad that a child endures can be blamed on the parents, as they set it all in motion. Played Dr. Frankenstein? Why? Because society says so? Because they have a biological imperative? No, it's because they didn't even think about it." Lamenting that nobody understands him, he wrote in another post, "Because most of these people won't hesitate to demean NEETs, and further will try to make them out to be parasitic leeches, when in reality it's just parents who realize they brought someone into a shithole world and that it's their fault their child isn't doing well." Going deeper down the Reddit rabbit hole, Guy eventually got into various other beliefs as well. For one, he became a vegan, but not just a normal one. He became what is called an abolitionist vegan, meaning that he strongly believed that all animal use should be forbidden by humans. He said that he believed in negative utilitarianism, meaning that he felt we should aim to ease suffering, not increase happiness. Most of all, Guy came to view himself as a pro-mortalist, pro-death in other words. He felt that it was best for any living being to die as soon as possible to avoid possible suffering. He used the term ephilus the most, which is more or less of a combination of being anti-birth and pro-death. With these new, abrasive beliefs came a difficulty in finding friends, something that Guy admitted to himself. He had already had enough trouble making friends before, and this only made it much, much harder, so again he chose to turn to Reddit. In a thread on a subreddit for making new friends, Guy came to describe himself. He listed out his hobbies before saying who he was as a person. That is where he wrote, "Now I'll list some things about me you may not like, just as a disclaimer, because they may be considered extreme and I do not want to waste your time or mine. I am not into modern acceptance culture. I think people are only entitled to their informed opinions. I would consider myself pro-death/anti-life. I despise nature and see it as something to be defeated. And no, I do not consider myself mentally ill just because I have a differing view of life." As he got more radical with these beliefs, he began to show much more clear signs of hatred. He started to refer to humans as glorified bugs, and began to refer to people who have kids as breeders, which is actually a very common Reddit thing to do. He got so into these ideals that he even made threads searching for mods for Minecraft that would promote antinatalism more so that he wouldn't have to deal with what he hated while playing video games. Eventually, he came to very overtly post about his violent ideations, saying that he often fantasized about killing others and even that he sympathized with Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter. He said, "I am an antinatalist and a philist who has seriously considered murdering people many times. I had an obsession with Adam Lanza for a while because I relate to him very much, unfortunately. Although it may sound crazy to you, I truly feel I have been raped by this world, and maybe because I am still fairly young, my natural response to this was extreme anger and the feeling that I need to send a message to the world that you can't just invalidate the way I feel by calling me crazy and whatnot. It's been very hard for me, but I try to make myself understand that it will not actually solve anything. I think Adam Lanza did what he did because he felt the way I did, and was just so overwhelmed by anger that it overrided his sensibilities. This is not the world for people who want to have honest conversations about real issues. It is a clown world, and it is maddening for people like me." He made this very clear in other ways as well, saying that it was his responsibility to kill anything he saw. "If I see any animal out in the wild, if I have a gun, aka a fast way to end its life, I believe I should end its life. Basically, I despise nature and all its creations." In addition to being friends with Daniel, Guy became good friends with a Tumblr girl named Sophie Tinney online. On her Tumblr, she listed herself as being a 27-year-old celibate vegan, a radical feminist, both an antinatalist and an ephilist, and most concerning, a supporter of people ending their own lives. Sophie had a channel on YouTube called Death Positive Vegan Antinatalist, where her only post was a video of her chicken, although it's believed that she had much more than that she privated. She posted much more videos to TikTok, where she called herself Vegan Antinatalist. There she mainly ranted about life, antinatalism, and animal abuse. These were all beliefs that Guy shared himself, making it very clear as to why the two hit it off so well. On Reddit, Sophie went by the name Toy Box of Thoughts, where she made posts along the lines of what Guy had been posting. She said that it was a good thing to be radical, comparing being a modern political radical to being, in her words, an eco-terrorist like Sonic the Hedgehog. Guy and Sophie became such good friends that, after a while, they entered into a pact. If one of them were to die, the other would soon follow suit. Guy gave the reason as to why they would do this himself, later saying that it would be far too much of a loss to lose the only person you could fully relate to. On April 22nd of 2025, Sophie Tinney decided to act on her views and came up with a plan to end it all. At her home in Fox Island, Washington, she convinced her boyfriend at the time, Lars Eugene Nelson, to shoot her in the head as she slept. Lars complied, going overboard and shooting her multiple times at point-blank range. Lars didn't seem to realize that, even with permission, killing someone is still illegal. Her death was listed as a homicide, and Lars was arrested shortly after, charged with second-degree murder. His bail was set at $750,000 during his arraignment, and he was later released on bond. Guy took this all very, very hard once he heard about what had happened. Still, though, it affected him in an odd way. For one, he knew that Sophie was going to do something like this at some point. He also couldn't morally be too depressed because that would conflict with his pro-mortalist viewpoints. Rather than assess himself and his views after feeling the pain of losing Sophie, he instead chose to double down in those beliefs. At this point, he wasn't talking to Daniel very frequently due to being more focused on Sophie, but the two were still in contact over Telegram. When Guy came across some of Daniel's recent posts, he was hit with inspiration. Daniel had written that he would gladly kill a whole island of people if he could. He said that this was to, as he put it, end their suffering and speed up the process of extinction of life on Earth. While Daniel had been doing his best to spread his ideology online and recruit others for his radical cause, Guy was right there, more than willing to do something he felt was revolutionary. The two young men began to collaborate immediately, setting their messages to auto-delete as soon as possible as they discussed their plans. Daniel came to order a bunch of supplies for he and Guy's upcoming mission. Given that Daniel had been working for a shipping company, it was fairly easy for him to make it all happen. Most of the supplies they would order were very similar to what the Oklahoma City bomber had used in his attack. First, Daniel ordered 180 pounds of ammonium nitrate and sent it to Guy's house. Then he ordered about 270 pounds of another chemical used in explosives. The packages listed Daniel's workplace as the return address and, much more oddly, were sent to Anya Folger. This was very likely a misspelling of Anya Forger, one of the main characters in an anime called Spy Family. I never thought I'd be name-dropping both Anya and Sonic in a crime video, but here we are. Guy started posting videos to his YouTube channel that showed him clearly making explosives as he tested them out in the desert near his home. In one video, Guy set a hydrogen balloon on fire. In others, he buried M80s deep into the sand and detonated them. In another, he experimented with a Geiger counter, showing it going off as he placed it near some uranium. One of the videos showed more success than the others, with it showing what they call a milk-cast explosive. It was powerful enough to punch holes into a heavy metal bar, the sound echoing all throughout the desert. For the next several weeks, Daniel and Guy continued to conduct experiments with their explosives in the garage, doing their best to avoid being seen while preparing for the main show. Daniel more or less moved in with Guy and his mother throughout this time. The two even used ChatGPT in order to find out how to better build a bomb, taking notes all along the way. In May, the two ordered even more explosive material online to be delivered to the house. Like many others before him, Guy decided that it was about time to start crafting some sort of manifesto. He didn't opt to write the traditional sort of document, though. Instead, he decided to express his views in a different sort of way. In May of 2025, Guy decided to make a website. This website would serve as somewhat of a manifesto for the attack he planned to commit. This website was hosted at promortalism.com and was titled "Fuck You Pro-Lifers." The website mainly consisted of an FAQ in which he preemptively detailed his reasons as for why he committed the attack. In response to "Why have you done this?" he listed that he was a pro-mortalist and an ephilist. He then said to refer to a small, now deceased YouTuber called EphilBlaze in order to learn more about those beliefs. In response to whether or not he was a psychotic killer, he said, "No, understand your death is already a guarantee, and you can thank your parents for that one. All a pro-mortalist is saying is let's make it happen sooner than later, and preferably peaceful rather than some disease or accident, to prevent your future suffering, and, more importantly, the suffering your existence will cause to all other sentient beings. When it came to his end goal, he stated, "The end goal is for the truth, ephilism, to win, and once it does, we can finally begin the process of sterilizing this planet of the disease of life. Life can only continue as long as people hold the delusional belief that it's not a zero-sum game causing senseless torture and messes it can never, or only partially, clean up. I think we need a war against pro-lifers. It is clear at this point that these people aren't only stupid, they simply do not care about the harm they are perpetuating by being willing agents for the DNA molecule. This should not be seen as tolerable to any intelligent and caring person. Don't be fooled by the ones who play stupid and pretend that they don't understand these simple truths. It's just their way of playing with you and saying, fuck you, we don't care." A lot of psychos are attracted to philosophy because they love to play mind games with people. Their intent is not to find any kind of truth, it is to have fun fucking with you. Most online debates I've seen are clearly not really debates. It's one person fooling another into thinking it's a debate, when in reality, the one doing the fooling has no intent of changing their mind on anything, and sometimes it's both parties, haha. He then goes on to reiterate for the reader that he believes in negative utilitarianism, ephilism, and abolitionist veganism before saying that religion is, in his words, retarded. When it comes to burning in hell, he says that your God doesn't exist, and that, if he did, he would choose Satan anyway. Finally, he listed that Sophie's death was a major motivating factor in what he was about to do. He wrote, "I've known for a few years now I wasn't going to allow myself to make it past my 20s. Recently, my best friend Sophie ended her life. She got the guy she was living with to shoot her while she was sleeping, her preferred method, and I don't think I really knew how much it was going to affect me. I've never related to someone so much, and I can't imagine I ever would again. We were both anti-sex. Don't mistake that for asexual, I'm talking like r/anti-sex misandrists, veg antinatalists, negative utilitarians. Both had borderline personality disorder. Anyway, we got along quite well and it was very nice, especially when you feel like you are in an apocalypse and nobody else seems to get anything. If I remember correctly, we agreed that if one of us died, the other would probably soon follow. It's just too much of a loss when there's nobody else you really relate to significantly." At the end of the page, he left a collection of links for anyone who might be interested in learning more about his views. One of the links was to none other than Adam Lanza's own videos in the form of transcripts. In the downloads directory of the website, Guy left behind a 30-minute MP3 file in which he explained his motivations for the attack in more detail. The audio wasn't well planned out like you might expect from a manifesto. Instead, Guy had simply prepared a few bullet points for what he wanted to talk about and spoke freely. This led to a long, rambling, disjointed rant about any topic he could think of. Much of the audio was simply a ramble about how he didn't consent to be born into this world and him insulting anyone who said that consent wouldn't have been possible in the first place.
Okay, so I figured I would just make a recording explaining why I've decided to bomb an IVF building or clinic. Basically, it just comes down to I'm angry that I exist, and that nobody got my consent to bring me here. And I know what you're gonna say. How could we have got your consent because you didn't exist? Blah blah blah. Exactly the point. There's no way you can get consent to bring someone here, so don't fucking do it, right?
He then says that life is a drug and that he no longer wants to take it.
I really never wanted to do this life drug. And I remember, like, when I was a kid, people just trying to, my whole life, really, people have always been trying to push this life drug onto me. People try to push experiences onto me, like, hey, let's, go to a concert or some bullshit. It's always something, kids pushing drugs or smoking on some other kid or whatever. It's not really any different from this, except in this case, it's more like fucking heroin. It's a much worse drug.
He then goes more into his philosophy on life, saying basically that it's all pointless and frivolous. He says that none of it is intelligent design and that life is merely an accident. He says that he realized this from a very young age, only being able to put it all into words as an adult. He says that life is all about fixing bad things and that there is no fundamental good state. In addition, he says that existence is slavery. He then says that preventing people from ending their own lives is a bad thing, because you're forcing the drug of life on them.
So people try to prevent others from killing themselves, especially if the person has like a peaceful way of doing it, right? And you try to prevent them from doing it. You're just pushing life on them, which again is a drug. So you're just pushing drugs on people. So fuck that.
He then gives his opinion on mass shooters. He finds it interesting that most of them tend to have the desire to end themselves beforehand. He feels that society is allowing these shooters to flourish by preventing them from dying. Afterwards, he rants about nobody having the right to die, complaining that the government doesn't offer some sort of easy way out. Then he rants about in vitro fertilization, saying that he is very against the concept. He wraps back around to the babies that might be born having no ability to provide consent to exist. He says that the intent doesn't matter, that you should still be punished regardless if you're causing harm, which he believes they are.
Even if you're causing harm and you don't know that you're causing harm, you still have to be dealt with. You know what I mean? So, just an unfortunate, reality.
Afterward, he goes on a rant about consumerism, yet another rant about consent to live, and a rant about people with his beliefs being silenced and shadow banned on YouTube. Ironically, he complains about people on the internet becoming more manipulative and more extreme in recent years. Although he presents it by saying that his group is the one being targeted. He also acknowledges that people will likely call him terminally online.
Even with, in the last few years, all this manipulation going on the internet and all the censorship going on, in the last few years, it's become so fucking extreme. I mean, I know there's assholes that are going to be like, oh, stop being online so much. It's like, dude, fuck you. The internet is really important.
He then continues to ramble and go over all of the points he had made up until this point one more time, explaining each of them in several different ways for a ramble that lasts several minutes. Then he rants about veganism for a few minutes, making all of the common talking points that most of us have already heard. Surprisingly, he admits that he is doing this for attention.
I'm only doing this because I feel like it's what I have to do to get people's fucking attention, and it's pretty clear that I care about all sentient life, right? All the feelings going on Earth. Yes, I want attention, but it's not for me personally, okay? It's for objectively important fucking causes, okay?
He ends the audio by saying that parents are the problem and that they are the real killers. He then says that anyone who doesn't agree with his arguments is simply wrong or being dishonest with themselves because he has explained it all so well.
Parents are the real killers here, okay? They're the real ones imposing harm and suffering and some kind of death process onto people. If they hear this argument and they still disagree, they're being dishonest, basically. Because, again, all this shit is really simple to understand.
Left within the comment code of the website, Guy didn't try to hide how much Sophie had meant to him. In the code, hidden to the viewer, he left the message, "I won't allow my brain to get over you, Sophie. There's no reason to anyways." At the top of the page, he left a download link, one that would soon contain the link to the live stream of the attack he was about to commit. With that, there was nothing left to do but ready himself for the attack that would soon provide that link. On the morning of May 17th, 2025, Guy woke up to start his day. Daniel had departed as he wanted to continue on his own mission of spreading his ideology all over the internet. Guy was fine with that, as his main goal was to end his own life while causing as much chaos as possible. That morning, Guy approached a family member and asked for permission to use their car, saying that he was going to use it to go to a local protest. In his mind, he wasn't even lying. That's exactly what he felt his attack was going to be, a protest against the very idea of life itself. Daniel's target was one that he felt would symbolize his views perfectly, a fertility clinic. This was the American Reproductive Centers in Palm Springs, a clinic that specialized in vitro fertilization, genetic testing, and egg donations. It was the only full-service facility in the Coachella Valley. Daniel brought a camera and tripod with him, hoping to livestream his attack as he had planned. He threw that, along with all of his explosives, into the silver Ford Fusion he was driving and set off for his target. He parked outside of the fertility clinic, set up his tripod and camera, and returned to the car. It is unknown as to whether the livestream failed to start from the beginning or if there was an error uploading it to the website, but the link would never come to appear. At 10:52 a.m., Guy detonated his bomb near the clinic and blew up his entire vehicle. He used so much explosive material that his body had almost been completely destroyed, leaving very little behind. The blast was large enough to be felt over a mile away. This blew a large hole into the wall of the building. Luckily, the clinic only operated on weekdays, so nobody was even inside. Tim Prendergast, the co-owner of a local art gallery nearby, was in his workplace when he felt the explosion. He said that, at first, he thought it was the start of an earthquake. It wasn't too long before he realized that this was a one-and-done explosion, meaning that wasn't the case. He ran down the street to see what was happening, seeing a large cloud of black smoke enveloping the clinic. He saw Guy's car in flames as multiple people in the area walked around in a daze with varying degrees of injuries. Some nearby buildings were slightly damaged but had their glass shattered. Then he saw little bits of Guy's body littered through the street. 4 people had been injured in the attack, but none of them died except for Guy himself. Not only that, but the actual staff of the clinic were completely unharmed, not even being present at the time. The damage was also really only done to the wall, leaving all of the embryos inside completely intact and the essential medical equipment being in perfectly good condition. In the end, Guy had accomplished absolutely nothing. He didn't even kill or severely injure anyone. He didn't damage the clinic's operations or kill any of their staff, and he definitely didn't do anything to get his ideology out there. He didn't even succeed in posting his live stream. It wasn't long before the authorities made their way out to the scene and saw what had happened for themselves. They immediately noticed Guy's fallen camera tripod on the ground. They also found 2 rifles likely owned by Guy, one being an AK-47 and the other being a non-specified similar sort of rifle, with the ammunition for both still being near the car. The assistant director for the Los Angeles FBI field office, Akil Davis, deemed the explosion to be an intentional act of terrorism. This case quickly spread all over the national news throughout the US and even onto the internet itself. Guy's website came to be known to those on the internet shortly after as well, being shared all over Twitter. With the case getting that much heat, Daniel decided that he couldn't sit around in the United States and risk being captured. He hopped onto a plane heading towards Denmark, making his exit. A few days after arriving in Denmark, he once again moved to Poland, where he would continue to hide. The FBI came to describe the attack as the biggest bombing that they had ever seen in South California, one that completely eclipsed the 2018 bombing of a day spa that previously held that record. In the end, they were unsure what kind of explosives Guy had even used in the attack. While they had made it public that one person had died in the attack, it soon came to light that that person was nobody innocent. It was Guy himself. In the beginning, the police weren't even sure if he had intentionally died in the attack or if it was some sort of mistake. These questions would come to be answered as the FBI got their hands on Guy's online writings, eventually coming across his Reddit post and his website, telling the public that he appeared to be an anti-pro-life nihilist. They said that Guy had never been on their radar for anything in the past either. The FBI made their way out to Guy and his mother's home about an hour from where the explosion took place and raided the house. There, Guy's 63-year-old mother was left very confused as they began to sort through all of his belongings. At the house, they found such extensive bomb-building material that they said it indeed did look like something that the Oklahoma City bomber would have had. Interestingly enough, when the FBI tried to interview Guy's neighbors, none of them had the slightest clue as to who he was despite having lived next to him for years. While his neighbors noted that it was a very small town where everyone knew everyone, they had never once laid eyes on Guy. Not long after the attack took place, all 4 people injured in the blast were released from the hospital in perfectly fine condition. The clinic that Guy bombed came to reopen shortly after the bombing took place in a new location, largely unaffected aside from the move. After the attack, Reddit came to ban its r/aphilism subreddit. While they had been promoting death and violence for years, Reddit doesn't tend to act on clearly troubling material until they are at risk of being in yet another PR crisis. Both Guy and Sophie's Reddit accounts were deleted shortly after as well, with Reddit trying to hide the evidence that they had let their content slide for years. When the FBI spoke to Guy's father, Richard, he confirmed that it was his son's voice on the audio recording left on his website. He told them that Guy had likely been duped by someone in committing the attack. This led them to wonder who exactly had helped him prepare all of this. After all, he was only 25 years old and didn't seem to have that much experience doing anything similar. The FBI set up a joint task force to find the source of the explosives, but they weren't coming up with much in the beginning. On the Sunday after the attack, they made a public plea for help in tracking Guy's movements before the explosion took place. It wasn't long before their efforts led them back to Daniel Park. The FBI made their way out to Kent, a town about 20 miles south of Seattle where Daniel had lived. There they found the recipe for a very large bomb, one that fit the description of the one used in the attack on the clinic perfectly. They found records showing that Daniel had purchased explosive materials here and there from way back in October of 2022 all the way up until May 2025, shortly before the attack took place. It became abundantly clear that he was indeed involved in the attack. They were able to track Daniel's movements, finding that he had fled to an airport 4 days after the attack took place. They were able to trace his whereabouts to Poland, where the authorities agreed to detain him. He was arraigned for extradition shortly after. He was deported from Poland and sent back to the US. There, when he arrived at the JFK airport in New York, he was swiftly arrested. He was then escorted off to jail. A few days later, he made an appearance before a judge. He showed up very thin, clearly lacking in sleep, and wearing a Fight Like Ukrainian shirt with a bandaged up hand. The prosecutors presented all of the allegations against him, leaving very little room for doubt. He was held on charges of malicious destruction of property, with charges relating to aiding terrorism likely to be added later. Daniel was being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles. However, he wouldn't be for long. Daniel was facing around 15 years in prison if he were convicted. He didn't like those odds, and on June 24, 2025, he decided to put his pro-mortalist views to work. He climbed to an upper level of the detention center and jumped off of the balcony, crashing down to the floor below. He was quickly found to be unresponsive. He was taken to a nearby hospital, but it was found that he was already long gone. In the end, neither Guy or Daniel really managed to accomplish anything or even go about spreading their views. If anything, they only succeeded in making their views associated with terrorism and getting them further censored all over the internet. In the end, some of their communities were outright banned, while the others were led to be more heavily scrutinized. In the end, the attack led to much more ridicule than anything, with really no signs of support in sight. Now that both of their lives have come to an end, so has this case. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found the topic interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. These days I have my own merch store, there you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts, coffee mugs, all sorts of stuff, go check it out. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything were to ever happen to this channel, or you just need to get a hold of me, that's the easiest way to do it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get most of the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.